Some of the negative health impacts of airline travel can actually be navigated around or negated completely if you take some of the precautions that I'm going to speak about in the show today. Food and hydration takes a massive hit. We are eating at different times. We are eating food that's not prepared by us. We're sometimes in a state of involuntary fasting. Pressure in the cabin and the dry air, actually, it makes us think that the food that we're eating is blander than it is. Each 1 hour time zone that you cross, you need at least 1 day to adjust. So if you're going across 4 time zones, if you want to perform mentally and physically in the way that you would in your home time zone, you need to get to that destination 4 days before. And that's not always possible in some professional sports. So there's a lot of tinkering happening with some really simple tweaks here and there. You will travel a lot healthier. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the InnerFight Podcast. Today, I'm going to talk all about how you can travel better. For some people, travel is an unavoidable part of life these days. Sometimes it could be where we live, sometimes it could be our job. We travel more than we've ever traveled before. In the last 2 decades, the travel industry, the amount of flights in the air has actually doubled. So in this week's show, I share various insights into the impact of travel on our health, which if we're traveling double, the impact could be double, and some of it is actually not super good. This week's show announcements. I don't know if you've managed to avoid it, and if you have, I'm sorry. However, right now, the Olympics is going on. No matter what sport you tune into, you probably will learn something, see something, and just get to experience something that honestly is absolutely insane. I won't go into all the different sports that I've learned things from and seen stuff happening, amazing stuff happening, but it only happens every 4 years, as many of you, hopefully all of you, will know. So my number one announcement this week, or encouragement this week, is please spend some time and have a watch of the Olympics. Various channels, no matter where you are in the world, have daily summaries, have highlights. BBC iPlayer obviously highlights all the stuff from the great British athletes, of which there's been some amazing performances, but it's not just the great British. In fact, we're nowhere near anywhere in the medals table. There are probably all sorts of different programs, no matter what television you have or access to around the world. Please have a look at it. It is inspiring and so many learnings on so many levels. It won't be finished. It'll run actually at the same time, I think, the CrossFit Games. The CrossFit Games begins on the 8th of August to the 11th of August. We started talking about it probably at the back end of last year. We went through the open, we've spoken about quarterfinals, semifinals, had all different coaches on chatting about it. And now we are at the point where the CrossFit Games, the competition to find the fittest man and woman on the planet, as well as teams, as well as adaptive athletes, as well as age group athletes, begins in the US on the 8th of August. That's important. Be sure to check it out. But what's more important is that we will host our own CrossFit Games week through our mainline classes from the 12th to the 16th. We do this every year. We take the workouts that we've seen in the CrossFit Games and we fit them somehow, sometimes quite creatively, into our mainline class. So keep your diary ready. Make sure you're back in the country by the 12th to 16th. Yes, absolutely, it's a reason to end your holiday earlier and get back. Games week runs in the class from 12th to the 16th of August. And the final announcement, we've had 2 weeks of it, and we think it's going into the 3rd week now, is that the track that we run at on a Tuesday, Track Tuesday at Sports City, 2 Mondays ago, sent us an email and said it's closed from tomorrow. So we quickly flipped, went back to what we call the InnerFight track, which is just across the way from the gym. Track Tuesday starts from the gym, 5:59 Tuesday mornings. It will continue. It doesn't matter if we have a real track or not a real track. Actually, The space that we use here in Studio City, just by the gym, works absolutely fantastic. And then we can all sweat all over the floor in Smith Street Cafe afterwards, which is great because Holly's not here at the moment, so she doesn't even know that the floor is covered in sweat for the whole day. It is on for the coming weeks. We will let you know when the track at Sports City reopens. We'll probably get an email and it say it's open in 2 minutes. That's just how they do things. That's it for this week's show announcements. Let's get into the show. This is episode number 926 of the InnerFight Podcast. No matter where you are in the world, thanks a lot for tuning in. Let's jump into today's show. So, what is the story when it comes to travel? What is actually going on? One of the stats I mentioned in the opening was the fact that air travel has doubled over the last 2 decades. And yes, that's quite a long period of time, 20 years. But the fact is that there are over 100,000 flights per day in the current era. That's a whole lot of flights. There's a really cool app, Flight Radar or Flight 24, where you can see all the airplanes. There's probably more than one of these apps, but where you can see all of the airplanes in the air at the same time, or planes that are in the air at the same time. And it's absolutely mind-blowing the number of flights that are actually up there at one time. Maybe a whole other show, maybe a whole other guest is how the skies navigate each other. I need to get an air traffic controller on. Actually, we have one. We have a member in the gym who is an air traffic controller. She could tell us all about how the motorway system of the sky actually works. But there are 100,000 flights in the air a day. That means there are a lot of us who are traveling. Air travel, time zones, lack of sleep, things like jet lag, food at different times, and different types of food from what might be our normal routine all have a massive impact on us. Some of us travel for fun, some of us travel for our jobs, so some of us actually can't avoid travel and these potential, and I say potential because some of the negative health impacts of airline travel can actually be navigated around or negated completely if you take some of the precautions that I'm going to speak about in the show today. You don't have to suffer from jet lag. You don't have to eat the bad food. You don't have to eat at bad times. However, air travel lends itself to those things happening. And that's why there is quite an alarming negative impact of travel, no matter whether it's for work or whether it's for pleasure, on our health. We need to take better care of ourselves, not only in this area, but definitely if we're traveling more, we need to be a little bit more aware of what's going on and what we can do. Some of the things that I'm speaking about, let's start there. What are some of the negative side effects of travel? There are obviously a lot of positives to travel. People love to travel, to go places, to experience things, to get business, to have a good time, to do whatever. So I'm not here to argue that you shouldn't travel and that the double in travel and 100,000 flights a day is a bad thing. It's absolutely not, unless you're on the whole environment thing, and then that's a whole other conversation again. Maybe we should get someone on to talk about that too. But what are the negative impacts or the negative side effects on our health? I mentioned it before, food and hydration takes a massive hit. We are eating at different times. We are eating food that's not prepared by us. We are sometimes eating more food than we should. We're sometimes in a state of fasting, voluntary fasting or involuntary fasting, should I say, a little bit of starvation. A lot of the food that we eat, I'm going to talk a little bit later in the show about what airlines actually do to food to keep it, to be able to serve it the way they serve it. But one of the things that they do to it is a lot of the food has higher levels of sugar than normal. A lot of the options on airplanes or in airports are actually super, super heavy in sugar. So we're seeing people eating a lot of not very good food. And then when we go into the hydration aspect of it, and this is getting a little bit better these days, but generally on airplanes, the amount of water that's available is limited. And sometimes a lot of airports are getting a lot better where we actually got access to water fountains. But a lot of the time, water is the most expensive either in ridiculous price restaurants or in airports. Some airports would charge £5 to £10, dollars, whatever it is in that local currency, for a 500 or a 750 ml bottle of water. So for people that aren't really down with hydration anyway, the thought of spending that much money to stay hydrated, and actually how much water should we be drinking in the air is probably a question too. And then there's the factor that maybe I don't want to go to the toilet all the time. A lot of people have some weird phobias about airplane and also airport toilets, that they're not clean, and they're probably right. However, it's probably more healthy to take water in and to go to a dirty toilet and to continue to not recycle the water, but get the water out of your system, rather than it is to worry too much about how clean the toilet is. Again, maybe another little side note. But the first thing is food. Our food and hydration is often massively negatively impacted by travel. Number one, because the food options available to us are very limited, and the ones that are available to us are perhaps more unhealthy or sugar dense. Most airports, unless you're in the deepest, darkest Africa, and they don't have much at all. I've got many stories about nutrition that I've had in airports in places like Nairobi, Malawi, something really not that great. But in most airports, the main option is fast food. And the second thing when it comes to that is our hydration levels are probably not what they should be. The second negative impact that we're seeing, and we've seen this for a long time, jet lag is nothing new, but jet lag and the fatigue that we're getting. One thing that I see more often than not is actually people, because of the increased number of flights, people really trying to squeeze their schedule, be it a work schedule or be it a holiday schedule, and therefore further damaging their sleep. Emirates Airline have actually made it super easy for us to get really jet lagged, really fatigued through flying. Jet lag will happen anyway because that's going across time zones. However, the fatigue levels, because Emirates have such a good variety of flights, you can fly 2, 3, or 4 times daily to a destination, whereas before you didn't have that flexibility. So I've seen over the last 10 years that a lot more people are flying through the night. They're either working a whole week and then flying out on a Friday night to get to a place on Saturday morning, so they're skipping a whole night of sleep, or the other way around, they're doing it at the start of the week, so they're waking up super early, or even flying back through Sunday night to arrive Monday morning 6 a.m. and be at work 8 a.m. when they haven't had a good night's sleep. We also see it in the corporate world where we're trying to squeeze hotel nights. There's a big cost saving for corporates, paying less hotel nights for people in certain places. So we're flying people through the night, flying people out of places when work finishes on a Friday afternoon, and we're flying them through the night to get home by Saturday. So we're seeing an insane amount of fatigue, lack of sleep, which is rarely made up for in the experience that I've had with a lot of people, especially in the region that we work with on sleep management that travel a lot, that sleep actually never gets made up. Remember, when it comes to sleep, we can catch up sleep, but we can't really store up sleep. We get to a point where we're fully fresh, and then we just start to deplete the batteries. So if we miss these nights of sleep, which if you think about it, could be at the start of the week, if someone's flying out early on a Monday morning to be on a Monday morning or a Monday lunchtime meeting, they might have woken up especially early, so they've sacrificed sleep on a Sunday night, and then they've flown back through the night or into the night at the end of the working week on a Thursday or Friday. There could be a night or a night and a half of sleep sacrifice there, which is a real big problem if we're not making it up as well. I'm going to talk a little bit more about jet lag later and how we can actually manage those levels of fatigue. Point number 3, negative impact of flying, of travel, is that we have a massively reduced amount of movement in the time that we're flying. A good way to look at this, which is always a good check-in, is if you do have on your wrist a step counter, when you're on a flight, within that 24 hours, have a look and see how many steps you're actually doing. It blows my mind from many flights that I take that people will be sat and actually I don't see them move for the whole flight. So for that flying period where anyway, if we have poor food, poor hydration, we have less natural circulation in the body, and we are also not enhancing any circulation in the body through movement. So the reduced movement, and that's why we get off the plane and physically we just don't feel great at all. We might feel a certain amount of stiffness. And this can also pass through to people sitting a lot on the plane, back pain, and that can become, and I've seen it become quite fast, a chronic issue. So reduced movement is a real negative effect of traveling that we need to try and manage, and we actually can manage. It's quite funny because airports have a lot of travelators in, and really that's not benefiting us a lot. It's benefiting the people that are super unfit, and if we didn't have those, they maybe would pass out or not even make it to the flight. But for people that want to stay healthy, a travelator or even these golf buggies that fly around airports should probably be outlawed, I think, as well. Dehydration I've spoken about. It is a point on its own, nutrition and hydration, but the fact that we're dehydrated, less circulation, is really a massive issue for us as well. It's something that we can manage if we want to manage it, but it just takes a little bit of extra effort, or sometimes a little bit, as I said earlier, a little bit of extra budget to pay £5 to £8 for 500 mils of water, which is, it should actually not be allowed, but that's a whole other conversation as well. Another negative impact we're seeing of air travel is probably an increased amount of screen time. And in the current day where we have Wi-Fi on airplanes as well, and I'm guilty as well, I get bored on the airplane, nothing much to do because I don't really like watching movies on the airplane, and I'm like, oh, I'll just catch up with what's on my phone and connect to the Wi-Fi. I just wish it wasn't there. I wish we didn't have the option to connect to it, but we do spend a lot of time, be it in airports or be it on the plane itself, increased amount of screen time, which we know can bring negative impact on a number of different levels. We've seen, my next point we see in various dosages, but the increase of disease and the passage of disease, airborne diseases through travel these days, probably should have a bit more data on this one, but probably is a little bit on the rise as well. So there's a little bit of a potential that we're open up, especially if you take an airline like Emirates, which I think they're the busiest flights I've ever been on. There's people super close, and I don't know if I don't know if it's a true rumor or is a rumor a true rumor. I don't know if it's true or not, but it seems like Emirates chairs are a little bit closer together. So you've got people a lot closer together. So the possibility of catching something as simple as a common cold could be a little bit, will definitely be enhanced if we're traveling a lot more. So the amount of weeks of the year or days of the year where our immune system is actually impacted by disease that we pick up from travel, and therefore days that we're not super healthy and we're not able to perform at the level we want to perform, they are also on the rise. Especially if you're traveling on a weekly basis, you open yourself up to these close contact areas where there can potentially, because planes are busier than they've ever been, where there can potentially be a lot more disease kicking around. So there's a number of negative impacts to travel, but all of those sort of the negative side effects, I believe we can probably navigate around if we're a little bit smart with things. And that's what I want to try and help us to be smart with. One more thing or a couple more things before we go to the solutions is a lot of people will ask, well, why am I getting extra or more dehydrated, more dehydrated in the sky when I'm actually not sweating a lot, I'm not moving around a lot? And that's a really good question. And there's a few different reasons why airplanes, talking of dehydration, I could definitely do with some water. There's a number of different reasons why airplanes actually are dehydrating us. Number one is that the amount of humidity in an airplane is a lot lower than in that cabin, because the air in the cabin is tightly controlled to make sure that we actually have oxygen when we're up there. But what it leads to is the humidity is a lot lower, so there is naturally less moisture in the air than there is down at Earth. You might not feel it. Some people might feel it. Some people might feel their skin feels really dry. I hear that a lot from different people. Some people might not feel that at all, but that is one reason, because the humidity levels in the cabin is different to what it is on the Earth. And leading on from that, the pressure in the cabin is a lot different as well. The cabin is pressurized basically to stimulate a lower altitude, but still it's the equivalent of being somewhere around 10,000 feet above sea level. So that has a massive impact on the air. The air is controlled, it's pressurized, and they tell you that when you get on the airplane, that the air is controlled within the cabin. And that leads to, we're not used to being at 10,000 feet above sea level. So that leads to dehydration as well. And there is, what I mentioned before, limited fluid intake is a massive issue for people when they travel. And also the consumption of things that dehydrate us, such as people consume more sometimes out of boredom or out of availability because it's just there available. Things like tea, coffee, and alcohol during flights. And if we're taking these things on and we're not taking on water, then we're obviously going to be dehydrated on a new level. So one of the kicks obviously is not to have any of those things when you're traveling, and just to have water, and to make sure you can find the water as well. There are, as I said, there are an increasing number of airports that have water fountains, so always traveling with a bottle, making sure that bottle's refilled. A lot of people as well, I think, don't ask enough on an airplane. I find I always take my water bottle on an airplane. I just go up to the galley and say, can you fill this up for me as well? And the staff are more times than not, they're compliant with it. Obviously, I'm just asking for 750 mils at once, and through a 6 to 7 hour flight, I might get that filled 2 or 3 times. So I'm aiming for around 3 liters in that time, and I've never been denied it. The reason I think I've been denied it once or twice, I used to ask for a 1.5 liter bottle of water and I used to get told to go away. But I think the reason why I'm not being denied it, or you won't be denied it, is because no one is really asking for water. And a lot of the airlines will probably land at their destination and still have a lot of water available. So get your bottle, go up to the galley, ask them to fill it in the airport once you've passed, airports that still have the 100 mils rule, but go into the galley and just ask them to fill it up. And most of the time they're actually super compliant. So that's really why we're getting more dehydrated. We're not drinking water as much as we should. We're consuming things that are dehydrating us even more, such as tea, coffee, alcohol, soft drinks as well. And then we have the challenge of the air humidity levels, or the way that the air comes into the cabin, which has lower humidity levels and it's pressurized to a higher level. These things make us dehydrated. And obviously, when we're dehydrated, we're not as healthy as we should be. Things are not happening in our body in the way that they should. And it doesn't fix itself. It's kind of like I was saying with the sleep. It's not fixing itself directly once we just have a glass of water when we land. Some flights could be a lot longer than 7 hours, 15 hours. We've been dehydrated. Just imagine in a normal day of 15 hours, how much water you could or should drink, 3 liters plus. And in a 15-hour flight, when the humidity is low, so you're not getting the natural levels of humidity, you're also in a pressurized cabin, you might take on 500 to 1 liter, 500 mils to 1 liter of water. So you're more dehydrated than you would be, and you're taking on less fluid than you would be. The impact of that is quite severe, and it could take a day or 2 days to actually rehydrate yourself if you're not paying good attention to it. So dehydration is something that is absolute carnage. That's why we get dehydrated, and hopefully that's given you some food for thought of how, and also how you could navigate around dehydration in the air. Let's move to the second point, which is a big point that's impacting our health. If you were to fix food, hydration, and your jet lag, you would travel a lot healthier. So the second point is food. What's happening to the food? Why is the food in airplanes so bad? And I'll come to a solution. Well, the solution is simple. The solution is to take your own. And I can talk you through how to be prepared for that, because that's something that I've done for a long time. Excuse me, to make sure that I'm not having the food as it is. So airline food often contains higher levels of two things, and compared to regular meals. One is salt, and the second is sugar. The reason why they play a little bit with the food, and maybe that sounds a bit weird, but it is, they're playing with it, they're putting high levels of salt and high levels of sugar. Taste perception at high altitude changes a lot due to what I was saying before. The pressure in the cabin and the dry air actually affects our taste buds. So it makes us think that the food that we're eating is blander than it is. It could be exactly the same food, but because we're eating at altitude, our taste buds are not working the same. It makes it taste blander. So the two easiest ingredients to enhance the flavor of food is salt and sugar. So airline food is loaded with salt and sugar. Of course, most airlines, I wouldn't say every airline, but most airlines offer various different meals, from vegetarian, vegan, no matter what it is. Some of the airlines have like 20 different offerings. However, so you think you're having a healthy option. However, those two ingredients will probably be a lot higher than they would normally be. They're also adding sugar and salt because of preservation. So to make the food last a little bit longer. There's quite a bit of time. In some countries, there might be more time, but also in some countries where a flight is going and coming back. So to take, for example, if a flight is a 4-hour flight, the crew actually might go and come back on that same flight. So they might use the same catering from the origin, go to the destination, and then on the way back, they would use the same food that they've taken from the origin. Given the fact that that food needs to be prepared and loaded onto the plane maybe an hour before that plane departs, that food could have been prepared anywhere up to, God knows, 24 hours before it was loaded onto the plane. So there's a lot of time that needs to be considered. So the food needs to be preserved so that when the return flight is happening, the food still tastes fresh, which higher salt content helps to preserve food for longer. So the transit time of the food is the reason why we see higher salt levels in the food as well. The other thing is, which is related to my point one, is the taste perception. So salt and sugar is enhancing the flavor of the food that we're having. So yes, we think we're getting healthier options. We think we're getting food that suits our dietary requirements. And to all intents and purposes, maybe we are. But ordering a low-cal meal or what you think is healthy still doesn't mean that those two ingredients are not being put in abundance. So you're actually not eating very healthy food at all. Sorry to spoil it for all of you, and sorry if you're an airline catering person. If you are, give me a shout and we definitely have a very good conversation. The other thing when it comes to food on airlines is often we're eating because we're a little bit bored. And we see this through a lot of flights, that there'll be snacks before a main meal, then there'll be a main meal, and then on the tray there's all sorts of different things. There's buns, there's dessert, there's cheese, there's chocolates, there's obviously it varies from flight to flight or airline to airline. And then a few hours after you finish that, they might come around with a snack or with a roll or with an ice cream or something like this. So if you actually think about the type of food or the amount of food that you're eating during that flight, it could be pretty high as well and more than you would normally have. And also probably not quite as healthy as you'd normally have. So yes, airline food, some people love it, a lot of people hate it, and they're probably the reasons for those two kind of devil's ingredients that keep on getting put in it. The third silo of negativity around travel, or the negative impact around travel, is, as I was talking about, fatigue and jet lag. So, and these things are quite different. Fatigue is actually just pure tiredness, and yes, it's caused by jet lag, but what really is going on with jet lag? Jet lag is all about crossing the time zones and essentially messing up our circadian rhythm, our circadian, almost if you want, our pacemaker, which basically what that does is it controls the timing of our 24 hours. So it tells us when to do what. It's based also on light that we see. So daytime, nighttime, this is why you feel tired at night and you actually feel like you want to get up when it gets light. It's very hard for us to sleep and sleep effectively in the day. Another big component of that, of course, is melatonin, which is a hormone that we secrete as it comes to the evening that actually makes us feel sleepy. So that's all a little bit up and down. It will change based on which direction you're going in. So when we're going east or west to east, it's slightly easier. When we're going east to west, it's normally slightly harder. And there were some studies done on, it's quite interesting. I read a study a few weeks ago when I was preparing this show on the impact of sports teams traveling from the East Coast to the West Coast of America. And when they went in one direction, they normally won, but when they went in the other direction, they normally lost. So some of you might feel that when you travel, for example, from Dubai to Europe, you don't feel too bad. You're able to get back on the time zone quite easily, quite quickly, whereas the other way, it kicks you a little bit more. That's the most common. We see different symptoms as well with jet lag, and which again leads to higher levels of fatigue, which is things like insomnia. We're just unable to sleep, or we're waking up at bad times of the night, or we're feeling super tired during the day because we haven't slept very well in the night. We also experience things like poor performance and poor memory and concentration. And if you take that point in isolation, if we're traveling for work and we're breaking the rules of when we get up, we're not traveling well, and we have extended jet lag, then we have poor performance, poor memory, and poor concentration. What sort of work are we doing when we get to that destination? What sort of shape are you in? How much are you retaining, and how productive really are you? Another big thing as well with regards to jet lag and fatigue is actually our digestive system doesn't work as well as it should do, and therefore we could have a number of different issues. You might have felt this a couple of days, or even when flying, you don't go to the toilet as you normally do. A couple of days after flying, it might take time to get back on track. So our digestive system isn't working as well as it should be or could be. Therefore, we're not extracting nutrients in the right way, and this will make us feel basically lethargic, not well. It will also contribute to a lack of concentration at the same time as well. And if you couple that with the fact that when you were flying, you were eating highly laden salt and sugared food, we've got a real train smash on our hands here. So we need to be really, really careful. Sleep disturbance is a massive issue. We will see increased sleepiness in the day, big dips in productivity, big dips in mental concentration, and therefore not really much fun. If we're going on holiday, we're not going to enjoy it because we're not feeling great. And also, if we're going for work, we're going to be very counterproductive. There are a number of different apps that will help you almost counteract jet lag as much as possible. you can tune into those. They'll tell you when to eat and how many days prior to leaving you might start to make adjustments. Some people think that they don't have time or don't want to prioritize those adjustments. Those adjustments could also be around light, because light's important when we actually think it's nighttime or when it's not nighttime, and almost trying to trick the body into believing that it's nighttime. So things like taking melatonin, things like wearing sunglasses in the days leading up to travel. And this is actually what a lot of people that we see it used more in, there's things like Formula One would definitely use this for their drivers, because the demands of those drivers is so hectic. They have to move fast from country to country, and they cannot afford the time. We generally say for each time zone for each 1 hour time zone that you cross, you need at least 1 day to adjust. So if you're going across 4 time zones, if you want to perform mentally and physically in the way that you would in your home time zone, you need to get to that destination 4 days before. And that's not always possible in some professional sports. So there's a lot of tinkering happening with things like Formula One drivers and athletes that are moving across time zones for the demands of that sport, loading with melatonin and making sure that, or trying to trick the body to be sleeping at certain times when actually in the time zone that they're in, it is still daytime. This could apply in the business world as well. However, I think the business world is a little bit less forgiving for that. And sadly, if you said to someone, yeah, I can't do a meeting at 4 o'clock because I can't be in light at 4 o'clock today because I'm trying to get back on my correct time zone so that I can be efficient in the office towards the end of the week, they'd probably look at you a bit crazy and say, well, you're here now, you're working on this time zone now, but we haven't given them the consideration or the time allowance to get onto that time zone effectively. So we not only need to plan for our trip food-wise, but we also need to plan for our trip sleep-wise. And then we'll see that feeling of jet lag and that almost constant or delayed or fatigue that we feel in the first few days, definitely in the first 1 or 2 days after a trip. We might see it brought down a little bit. But ultimately, we need, if we can, to prepare for a trip, we probably need to be making sure that our sleep is really in check. And things like saying, okay, I'll sleep on the airplane. Yes, you probably will, but what will the quality of that sleep be is always something that I'm sort of double guessing or just outright saying it's not quality sleep. You can't say, I'll sleep 6 hours tonight because I'll get 2 hours on the airplane. Whoever says they sleep super well on the airplane, except for the guys in first class, are probably not telling the truth. You might feel that you sleep good, but if you go back to how we're getting dehydrated and the oxygen alone and the pressurization of a cabin, we're not getting optimal sleep. It's nothing like, even if you are feeling comfortable in a business class seat or a first class seat, you're not actually getting quality sleep because you're not getting enough good oxygen into the body. So what should we do? What are my tips, or what are some good tips? They're not mine, they're global tips for maybe planning a trip. And yes, most of them are almost the opposite of the negative side effects that I've spoken about, but maybe, or hopefully, some ideas are new to you guys. So number one, when it comes to sleep, is ensure that where possible, the flights are not disturbing our regular sleeping patterns. So if possible, sleep through the night, make sure you get about 8 hours. If that means going to bed early because your flight's at 7 in the morning, then go to bed early. You're gonna feel better at the other end, and make sure you actually have the ability to do that. Some flights are obviously a lot longer, so you are gonna fly through the night, but where possible, and yes, I've broken this rule many times, but where possible, try not to fly through the night. So try and fly during the daytime, your body clock daytime, and it will make sure that you don't get quite as fatigued as you might do otherwise. Another trick is what I was speaking about when it comes to jet lag, is trying to get on the time zone, trying to move yourself closer to the time zone. So the apps that are available that start to move your food a few days before you go on a flight, they'll also tell you things like I was talking about earlier, things like tea and coffee, when you should potentially have them, not have them, and what impact that might make based on jet lag. So you're almost just preparing yourself. You're traveling a little bit smarter when it comes to jet lag. When it comes to food, where possible, try and take your own healthy food with you. It's perfectly legal. I've never been stopped. I take food all the way around the world. You have to be careful when you're going into certain countries, such as the country I'm in right now, Australia. You can bring food in, but you have to declare it. So I just eat all my food on the airplane instead. But take food with you, take enough food, take nutrient-dense food, so that there isn't a temptation to eat some of the food that's on the airplane that is loaded with salt and with sugar. Try not to eat in airports, and if you are going to eat in an airport, try to go to the option that is the healthiest option. In airports, yes, there are a lot of unhealthy options, but some airports have healthy options as well, and that food shouldn't be as laden with salt and sugar. It may be, but it shouldn't be as laden with salt and sugar as the food that you're going to get up in the sky. Try and, where possible, and I think this is for life when it comes to food, don't get yourself in a pickle where, just be organized that you're in a pickle where you don't have an option but to eat bad food. And I know that some people will be like, yeah, but life is fast, life is tough, but if we're going to travel well and we're going to travel healthy and we're going to get to our destination as healthy as possible and we're going to recover as fast as possible, food is a massive part of it. I think on some flights I've actually asked people to heat my food as well. I don't do that so much these days because especially after COVID, they got all a bit weird about it. But take your own food. I even take my own coffee, which is sometimes not a great idea because I admit I don't always travel perfectly, but sometimes I end up drinking one coffee too many or I drink it too late, which sometimes is from a bad calculation or sometimes because I just want to have a cup of coffee. But I'm always trying to balance that out with plenty of water. But take all of your own food, make it the night before. We have a number of dishes that that is go-to travel food, that's easy, that tastes good in the air, that also is not like super messy. It's not going to fall apart all in my bag. I don't think I've had that happen for quite a while. And one interesting hack as well is I actually made overnight oats. I started traveling with overnight oats a while back. And one of the biggest for morning flights, so that I could have my same routine. If I was taking an 8 a.m. flight, I still have my breakfast at 9:30 on the plane. And funny fact is that the airport I was traveling through, they had still the ban on liquid and gas, nothing over 100 mils, but within my oats was 200 mils of water. Very interesting. Anyway, we'll move on. Food and hydration we've spoken about. Sleep we've spoken about. Get your sleep the night before. Make sure that you are factoring sleep into your travel plans. So same as you sit down and you think, what am I going to take, or what am I going to do when I get there? What does my sleep look like? So try not to plan, I'm going to land in this place and I'm going to go full gas, and because I'm going to be on that time, it's going to be okay. When you look at it, you could have been up for 16 or 18 hours and you might have sacrificed your sleep the night before. So please, where possible, manage your sleep. Yes, you can sleep a little bit on the airplane, that's for sure, but that shouldn't really be part of your overall sleep. Your sleep in your origin and your sleep in the destination is really what matters. When it comes to movement, try and move as much as you can. There's a fine line here, especially if you're based in somewhere like the Middle East and it's the middle of summer. I don't advise people going out and running for an hour before they get on a flight because you'll be completely dehydrated. But some form of movement when you wake up, maybe in your lounge, maybe a yoga flow or something like that, just to move your body and move your spine would be super beneficial. In the airports, don't take the travelator. We spoke about that before. Don't take the elevator. Use the stairs. Move as much as possible. See if you can still accumulate 5,000 to 10,000 steps on a day when you're traveling. Get up in the airplane, move around. Yes, be that annoying person that's just constantly on the move. It's for your health. You're allowed to do it. You can go up and down the aisle as much as you want. try and hit 10,000 steps if you can on a day of travel. Same if you get to a destination, even if you are in good time and you're not breaking any of the sleep laws that you put in place, go for a run, light run, jog, walk, whatever, but try and limit really intense exercise because you are going to have a little bit of fatigue in your body. So movement is good, high intensity and something that's going to dehydrate you massively is not such a good idea. So be a little, and if you have to compromise sleep to get up, so if you have a 7 a.m. flight, you need to be there at 5 a.m. and you've got to get up at 3:30 to go for and complete your movement, and you're not able to get in bed on time, I would say that the amount of movement needs to be reduced, or the time that you're spending doing that movement definitely needs to be reduced as well. But some form of movement, I think, is super important. And the last thing, we spoke about it earlier, is screen time. I like to try and have a little bit of a game plan of what maybe we want to achieve on a flight. And yes, it could be watching a video on, or doing a little bit of work, or reading a book, but definitely don't be guilty like me. Try to stay away from the Wi-Fi. Some flights, I nail it, don't get me wrong. And some flights I just log on and start WhatsApping Holly and try and ignore everything else that's coming in, but that's also not always possible. But try and have a little bit of game plan of what you're actually going to do on a flight. Maybe it's a good time to do some reflection, to do a little bit of journaling, or to catch up. One hack that I really enjoyed was, and I continue to enjoy, is YouTube Premium. I can download some YouTube to my iPad and I can watch that or catch up on certain stuff. But again, I don't like to have that going the whole of the flight. So a little bit of game plan around that. I'm sure if you think about those things, there's nothing there that isn't doable with a little bit of planning. I wanted to make this show quite practical. There's nothing too far-fetched. I don't want anyone to do 300 burpees in a galley or 12 million push-ups in a departure lounge. That's not necessary at all. It's just being a little bit more mindful about how you're traveling and start to measure the impacts as well. Maybe if nothing has really hit home in this show, why not measure the impacts of the way that you're traveling at the moment, how you feel when you get to a destination, how your mental focus and your concentration feels when you're traveling for business, how you feel within yourself if you do have too much tea, coffee, or alcohol on a flight, and do a little bit of reflection on that, and then say, okay, maybe I'll change this up and I'll change that up. I think a good game plan for any part of your life is super beneficial, but with the amount of increase of travel, especially for those of us that live in the UAE, just to go home, we have to travel, and so many people are traveling a lot more for work. I think we can be a lot more mindful about the way that we travel, and with some really simple tweaks here and there, based on what I've spoken about, you will travel a lot healthier. That's it for the show. Safe travels. Think about it. Hydration, food, fatigue, jet lag, and a little bit of movement, and you'll travel a lot healthier. Thanks a lot for listening. I'll catch you next time.